Hello, hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. Thank you for coming back to listen to more of Queen Andraya. If you would like to follow Brenda's Books online, I am on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Today we are on Chapter 23. Here we go. Chapter 23, The Dungeon. Queen Andraya had never seen a palace party get silent so fast. All eyes fixated on the prince. Steffan's face colored with a mixture of shock, rage, and humiliation. Now that the ambassador clearly held everyone's attention, he yelled again. "The Prince of Deldria is the very man who tried to poison the queen!" Steffan hollered back in the same boisterous voice. "Of all the grossest falsehoods! This man is an imposter! He is a merchant from Sandrian, posing as the ambassador for King Zokai." Shocked murmuring scattered all around, some whimpering, others angry. "I am nothing of the sort!" the imposter shouted, shoving Steffan in the chest, causing a few women in the room to shriek. "Hudson!" Andraya cried. The queen's bodyguard appeared as if out of thin air and yanked the imposter back by his ear. He tried to push against Hudson's thick frame, but Hudson held him close, as if he were giving him a violent hug, squeezing the imposter's arms tight against his own body. "Take him to the dungeon," ordered the queen. A few gasps echoed across the throne hall. Hudson hauled the flailing man out the side door. "What about the prince?" a woman called. The queen did not see who it was. "Yes, your majesty," Marquis Draven rasped. "You may recall that an accused murderer, successful or not, must be confined as well." His otherwise grave expression held a slight gleam in his eye. Andraya's heart sank. He was right. She turned to Steffan, who looked as downcast and distraught as she had ever seen him. "You cannot believe it is true," he whispered. The queen shook her head. "I do not believe it, but I must follow the law." His dejected expression ripped at her soul. "Besnik, please find Bruce," the queen said. "I am right here, your majesty." The queen shifted to see her second bodyguard, almost as large as Hudson, standing beside her. "Take the prince away," she forced herself to say. Words were not sufficient for the look on Steffan's face now. He just stood there, utterly pale and still, almost as if he were seeing an illusion. The queen reached out and touched his arm. He barely seemed to notice. "I will find a way to get you released. I promise. The truth always prevails in the end." Steffan blinked and nodded. Then Bruce grabbed the prince by the arm. Steffan gave Andraya one last pleading look before allowing himself to be led away, while the throne room muttered all kinds of approvals and disapprovals. The queen watched him retreat. With every step he took, he seemed to take a bit of Andraya's heart with him, which surprised the queen. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Dolian grinning from ear to ear. She turned a sharp head to face him. Immediately, he forced a serious expression. "You are despicable," she said in a fierce whisper. Before the chancellor could respond, she called loudly, "The party is over! It is time to clear out!" Every party guest obeyed quite promptly, hastily finishing up their hors d'oeuvres and wine, and filing out the various doors of the throne room. Members of the orchestra packed up their instruments and followed suit. "I will stay here with you to discuss everything," Dolian said to the queen. Thankfully, she did not have to respond as Lord Lucas placed a hand on the chancellor's back and pushed him forward. "No, you will not, Dolian." "Oh, your majesty, goodness me!" Andraya refrained from rolling her eyes when Lord Martin walked briskly toward her. "My queen, what a dreadful position you are in! To think an imposter has been in your palace all this time without your knowledge! And the prince! What horrible news!" he said, in his classic melodrama. "He certainly tricked us all, did he not?" "The prince is not guilty, my lord," the queen said coolly. "Oh, absolutely not," Martin cried, changing his mind. "We shall prove him innocent. I will help you, madam, with whatever you wish." "I wish to be alone," the Queen said. "I need to think." Andraya turned around and stepped onto the dais, where the orchestra had been, and up to her throne. She plopped herself down and stared across the long throne hall. "Oh, well, we can think together," Martin suggested, as he followed the Queen and stopped just below her throne. But Andraya's thoughts were already far away from him. She forced herself to meet his eye. "Not tonight, my lord. I need to be alone." "But my Queen," Martin began. "Shall I remove him?" This was Hudson's voice. Andraya was surprised to see him standing near her again. "No, I am sure Lord Martin will see himself out," Andraya said pointedly. Martin flushed, then bowed and marched down the throne hall and out the double doors. Andraya stared at those doors long and hard, until she could concentrate enough to see the pages of Chaldean law in her head. She knew impersonating a royal merited the guillotine, but she wanted to be able to prove it was true before giving the order. The last leader she wanted to be like was King Gordon, who threw the law out the window simply because he could. Then there was attempted murder. That also merited the guillotine, but Steffan could not have done it. She knew in her gut he was innocent. In her mind's eye, she recalled perfectly the small clause in Chaldean law about assassination attempts. Probable motive is needed for execution of a crime of this magnitude. The majority of the council must agree on the probable motive. Andraya grimaced. She suddenly hated this law. Should there not be proof for a crime of this magnitude? Surely, Andraya! The Queen jumped in place, her heart leaping to her throat. "Goodness me, Colleen! I have never been so startled in my life." "I am sorry," Colleen said. "I tried to break your concentration 4 times. I have never seen you so focused on your thoughts. And I need to keep thinking. What is it?" Colleen placed a tray of food on her lap. "I promised Besnik that I would see that you ate, since you did not eat at the party." Andraya sighed heavily. "I hate stopping to eat when I have so much work to do." "Well, if you do not, you will end up in the infirmary again, and that will definitely slow your progress." Andraya scowled. "I hate when you are practical." "And correct," Colleen said, sliding the tray closer to her. Andraya sighed in resignation and devoured her turkey and gravy, mashed potatoes and string beans, then leaned back in her throne and gazed up at the ceiling 4 stories high, while she scanned her mind for the pages of Chaldean law about false accusations. If a false accusation is made against another, that person will suffer whatever punishment the head crown sees fit. Andraya grimaced again. "Colleen, we must find who tried to poison me." Andraya nodded as she sat next to her throne. "Is that the only way to release the prince?" "No, I can get him released tomorrow." "How?" Colleen asked, her head perking up. Andraya ignored her question. "And I need to find someone else in the palace court who has been to Sandrian and speaks the language. If I find 2 people, that would be best. Will you relay this message to Alvin, please?" Andraya gave her tray to Colleen and stood. "Yes, but how are you going to get the prince released?" Colleen repeated, getting to her feet. "I will explain later. Hudson, take me to the dungeon. I wish to see the prince." Queen Andraya entered the dungeon for the first time in her life. She hoped it was the last. The downward spiraled stone stairs sprouted filthy cracks. Darkness thickened with each step. She and Hudson finally reached a long, lonely cement floor, with barred cells lining either side. Andraya shivered in the cold. Why was this dungeon so huge? The space probably held 50 cells, each with a small, dusty barred window high on the wall, causing various spots of light to shine down the cement center aisle. She knew that Chaldeans had a history of executing criminals rather than keeping them prisoner, so the only 2 people in this large, dirty basement were Prince Steffan and the imposter. "The prince is this way," Hudson whispered in a low voice. Not 2 steps later, the bars next to them rattled, and the imposter's face appeared, backlit with a square of sunlight. He bared his teeth, as if he were a wild animal. "Here comes the queen, in all her self-righteous glory," he sneered. Andraya paid him no heed, as she and Hudson passed on by. But someone else answered, shouting angrily in a foreign language. His voice echoed off the cement walls. "Steffan," Andraya whispered. She quickened her step, with Hudson keeping pace. He tugged at her arm when they reached Steffan's cell. Andraya gasped at the sight of him. He sat on the cement floor with his head hanging between his knees. She had expected to see him like this, but that did not make the sight easier to see. She squatted low and spoke through the bars. "I am so sorry." Her eyes burned with tears. The prince shifted his gaze to her. He was just out of reach from the window's stream of light, but she could still see his stoic expression. "You were going to ruin that lovely dress." The queen grabbed the bars in front of her. "I am more concerned about getting you out of here." Then the imposter's growling voice reverberated off the walls. "Ah, of course you would save the Prince of Deldria. He thinks women are equal." Then he let out a maniacal laugh. They both ignored him, and the prince switched his language to Medianese, so neither the imposter nor Hudson could understand them. "How are you going to do that?" Andraya took his lead and spoke in Medianese as well. "You do not have sufficient motive. I will convince the council of that tomorrow." The prince bowed his head and chuckled. "If I had sufficient motive, what would it be?" "To be king, and gain the greatest power in the royal courts. But it would not make sense for you to kill me while you were courting me, since currently you have relatively no power in Chaldrea. So you see, you do not have sufficient motive." "Someone could have hired me," Steffan pointed out. "Are you friends with anyone in the palace who dislikes me?" the queen asked. The prince tilted his head to look at the ceiling. After a long moment he said, "I do not believe so. And you already have so much wealth. I doubt more money would tempt you." Steffan smiled sadly. "You are right, it would not. But I doubt everyone will see it that way. There are plenty of wealthy men who still cannot get enough money." Andraya frowned. "I have always wondered why the law makes it so difficult to release someone from confinement, but makes it so easy to condemn them." "I am certain you will find a way to change the law, so that it is more just." Andraya cocked her head. "What makes you say that?" Steffan's lips curled up. "You have a brilliant mind, and a strong heart to make difficult decisions. I have already seen that firsthand." He shifted on the cement floor, grimacing inadvertently. "Are you in pain?" Andraya asked. Steffan flashed her a smile, but it was a little bit of a cringe too. "Please, do not worry about me." "Oh, of course. It is very easy not to worry about the man I care about being imprisoned." "Do you?" he asked, looking sad. "Care about you?" Steffan nodded solemnly. "Of course I do. I do not want you in here. I have never seen a sight so horrible." Steffan shook his head. "You have to obey the law. I understand that. I am talking about what you said to me earlier, about thinking I have been tricking you." Andraya hesitated. "Have you?" Steffan's eyes popped out as his head fell down a bit. "No," he said emphatically. "Why would you suddenly think that?" "Because She trailed off. Steffan gazed at her curiously for a long moment, before scooting closer to her so that he was right next to the bars. "What happened to you, Andraya?" The queen sucked in a breath. "Is it all right if I call you that?" "You have before." "Does that mean yes?" Andraya hesitated but nodded. "What happened to you?" he repeated. "Well, I always thought my father was a good judge of character, and... "And?" he prodded. "Well, he is the one who arranged my marriage to King Gordon." Steffan waited for her to finish, staring at her with more intensity than she had ever seen. She held his gaze. She could not tell him. He would see her differently, and she would not have that. Not after she had confined him to the dungeon. She shook her head. It does not matter. Of course it does, he said readily. How is it that you are more concerned about me when you are the one imprisoned? Steffan shrugged. I know you will get me out. You do? He cracked a grin. Absolutely. Now tell me, do you have any theories of why Reuben would fake being an ambassador? Reuben? The imposter. I heard the Chancellor use his name at one point. What do you think his motive of deception is? Andraya shrugged. I cannot fathom it. I believe he might be trying to hide something erroneous going on in his kingdom. I think, my queen, the royals in Sandrian could be in grave trouble. But why would he care to come all this way to make us think otherwise? The queen asked. Steffan shrugged. I do not know. Do you think Sandrian's great dislike of their king could have caused a common revolt? Steffan's eyes widened. I suppose it is possible. I must write to King Zokai and tell him of this, and see what kind of response I get. Is there a Duke of Chaldrea? Steffan asked. Yes, but his mind is not quite with him anymore, so his title is only honorary. So that means the Marquis is next in line to the throne, Steffan noted. Yes, but honestly, I do not see him as wanting that kind of power. The man hardly seeks attention. What about the Chancellor? A muscle in his jaw jumped with the question. Andraya grimaced. He definitely would want that kind of power. He is a chauvinist at its finest, Steffan said, with slight malice in his tone. Indeed, Andraya said with a nod. But he does have genuine interest in you, Steffan said with reluctance. That does not mean he does not have genuine interest in being king, Andraya pointed out. Steffan looked at the ceiling again. Yes, but I do not think he would poison you. What about you? Steffan whirled his head back around. What? Why? Andraya held up a hand to stop him. What I mean is, do you want to be king? Steffan sucked in a breath as he scrutinized her face. He rubbed his lips together slowly as he considered his answer. Being king has been a dream of mine since I was a child. I see, Andraya said, looking at the ground. But, he said, leaning into the bars, I would never dream of wanting a head crown solely to myself. Andraya looked back up at him. He appeared completely serious. But that is not possible in Chaldrea. I know that, Steffan whispered. And I do not plan on giving up my head crown, Andraya reminded him. Steffan smiled. I know that also, and I would not want you to. A moment of silence passed as the two of them stared at each other. Andraya finally gave in to her aching legs and stood. I also do not plan on you staying here long. I better get to work. I think you should rest first, Steffan said, looking up at her. How is it that you are still thinking of me? Andraya asked, flabbergasted. Steffan chuckled and shook his head. Then he gazed up at her with his penetrating blue eyes. I am always thinking of you. The queen's lips curled up. Stay well, your highness. Steffan tilted his head back in disapproval. Must you call me that? I suppose I do not need to in all circumstances. Steffan. She gave him a bright smile. The prince grinned back. Thank you. If you ever need to talk anything out, I have an open schedule. Not for long, you won't. The queen moved to walk away. Andraya wait. She turned to face him. Thank you for caring enough to see me. Andraya squatted again and reached her slender arm through the bars and squeezed his shoulder. Of course. I am so sorry you must endure this. Steffan stared at her in his soft, familiar way. Do you trust me? Andraya hesitated but said, Yes, and I will unless you give me a reason not to. I promise I will not. And Andraya, he paused to look her right in the eye. I do not make promises I cannot keep. Ever. And that concludes Chapter 23. I hope you come back next Thursday for Chapter 24 of Queen Andraya. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful week. Until next time, take care.